body and mind.
My father said, this is the help I'm willing to give you. And it's the only help I'm willing to give you.
My dear friend Tim passed away on Thanksgiving of this year, found this recording, and knew that I had to put it out into the world. Please, be good to yourselves and each other.
Programming on KFAI is supported in part by Quit Partner. At no cost.
The viewpoints expressed in this program are the opinions of the people expressing them and are not necessarily those of Fresh Air Incorporated, its staff, or its board of directors.
Programming is supported by Family Tree Clinic, a family planning, reproductive, and sexual health education clinic, offering a wide array of services like limited primary care, transgender hormone care, PrEP, and all options counseling. On the corner of Snelling and Marshall in St. Paul. More at familytreeclinic.org. Family Tree Clinic. Be healthy, be you.
There'll be no rich, there'll be no poor. Classism will be no more. There will be no more racial war. They will respect us for who we are. The greedy man's well will run dry, and he will watch his children cry. And he now knows just how it feels to go to bed without a meal. One day, oh, one day, children, we will watch when the tables turn. One day, oh, one day, children, we will watch when the tables turn. Babylon borders will fall. We'll build bridges, no more war, and the world will be as one. Equal rights for every man. The Middle East will free from war, and the children free from scar. No more health crisis in Africa. No more racism in America. One day, oh, one day, children, we will watch when the tables turn. One day, oh, one day, children, we will watch when the tables turn. One day, the first becomes the last. The slow becomes the fast. The future will become the past. Giant trees will spring from grass. One day, oh, one day, children, we will watch when the tables turn. One day, oh, one day, children, we will watch when the tables turn. One day,
Al McFarlane. Welcome to Conversations with Al McFarlane. Starting today's...
There is a shortage of 500,000 machine learning and artificial intelligence professionals. Keeping this in mind.
There we go. I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to Conversations with Al McFarlane. Glad to be here and glad to have you along. Here we are at the end of the year, almost putting 2020 behind us, looking forward to a better 2021. Boy, has it been an eventful and amazing and a frightening 2020. Let me start, though, by thanking my cousin in Kingston, Jamaica, Philip Earthcry McFarlane, for the music that we use for the theme for today's show. We hope to keep presenting that music as the theme for this program in the weeks ahead and bring other music from Phil and Earthcry as we proceed. Also, hopefully, create some collaborations between Phil and my brother Wayne McFarlane, Wayne with Ipso Facto and the variations thereof. The music is healing, the music is inspiring, it creates a sense of possibility, a sense of calm, and sometimes a sense of urgency that makes you move. I think that today's program sort of does all of that. We want to give our community and you, our listeners and our viewers, a sense of calm, the sense that despite the disruption in society, both with George Floyd and with COVID-19, with the economic upheaval, that brighter days are ahead, and that as a community and as a world, we'll get through it and we'll be able to, as President-elect Joe Biden says, build back better. One of the organizations in Twin Cities that's working towards that end is called the Minnesota Black Business Support Collective. And I'm pleased to have as a guest today, Elaine Rasmussen, who's CEO of Social Impact Strategies Group. And she's a member of the Black Business Support Collective. We're here to talk about the collective, about the sense in the community of how we can move forward as Black entrepreneurs, as Black businesses, and as a community. Elaine, shall I call you Elaine? What's the best way to refer to you? Unmute your mic.
Elaine is just fine. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much for being here. You know, and usually we do the radio either in studio, be face to face, then we move to just doing it remotely where we couldn't see each other. But what's beautiful now is the best of all worlds. We're not in studio, we're remote, but I see you and you can see me, and we're sharing ourselves with the world via the magic of Zoom and YouTube and Facebook. So if you're watching on YouTube, like this show, we want to grow the audience. If you're watching it on Facebook, you can respond to us or chime in. Send a message. Kelvin Curry, I think our team is monitoring the Facebook feed, and we'd love to have you involved in the conversation as well. But Elaine, talk about this notion, the vision and work of the Minnesota Black Business Support Collective.
Yes, well, thank you so much for having me on the show, Al. So appreciated, big fan. So this is really awesome for me. And I'm also live casting here from my office on Facebook Live. So folks can also join in on my channel. But the reason why the Black Collective, Black Business Support Collective actually came to be, we all knew each other and we'd already been sort of working in ad hoc ways together collectively. But as a result of COVID, really needed to come together collectively, one, to help. We all have different networks, to have our tentacles to come together to be like, hey, this is what I know, this is what you know, because so much of the information that was coming in, and particularly around relief efforts, was so disparate. So it was an opportunity for us to collectively share what information needed to be dispersed down to our various communities that we are working with, but also for us to leverage our power and our voice around what were the things that needed to be changed around, like the PPP, how the access was made available or not made available, particularly to Black folks. And from that, then George Floyd was murdered. And then it really just created a doubling down around, oh, not only do we need to have this space for collective voice and information sharing, now we can actually leverage the strength of our various organizations and the capacity that we have or don't have to actually have more exponential work in responding to the needs, not only of the business community needs, but also the citizens of our communities who continue to be left out.
And so you've got some wonderful partners. Let's talk about the organizations that have come together to form the collective. I think it's a wonderful idea, and I think it's worth lifting up. That's why we're here, because I think people need to know about how we cooperate, how we collaborate, and to see power in action. Talk about your partners.
Absolutely. So there's the African American Leadership Forum, which is ALF. Many know them as ALF. There's the Black Women's Wealth Alliance that is headed up by Kenya Knight Ahad, also known as BWWA. It's Just Law, which is a sole proprietorship legal firm that's here in the North Side. There's the Minnesota Black Chamber of Commerce. There's the Northside Economic Opportunity Network, which is often called NEON. There is the Neighborhood Development Corporation, which is operating on the St. Paul side, but has extensive relationships and cooperations in the Minneapolis area, also known as NDC. And there's the West Broadway Business and Area Coalition, which is headed up by Felicia Perry, who is not watching us on Facebook Live. Big shout out. And then Social Impact Strategies Group, which is my organization.
So, you did some research, right, to figure out what you should be doing. Talk about what you did and what you found.
I'm sorry, repeat that again.
You did some research, did surveys to get
Yes.
a sense of where the gaps were and how, what you should pull together as a strategy for collaboration. Talk about that, if you would.
Yeah, so we all have, like I said, we all have different tentacles into different communities, but also different business types and business sizes. So we really needed to understand what was happening, not only to the businesses, but really get a better idea of the landscape of those businesses. We really don't have a census, for lack of a better term, of Black businesses. What are the size? What are the type? We know things anecdotally, but this was an opportunity for us to really get more specific about what are the scope of the businesses, what types of businesses, how many employees or lack of employees, were they solopreneurs, were they micro enterprises, did they have contractors, and what kind of additional support would they need as far as even responding to COVID with their different businesses. So were they going to need PPE? What kinds of PPE were they going to need access to? How much did they need help in actually moving from an in-person business, a brick and mortar business, to doing virtual delivery or virtual, accepting digital payments, which a lot of our businesses weren't already set up to do. We like to work on the hustle. And so this was really requiring our business to really reframe their businesses to be able to shift from being in hustle mode and just kind of being on the grind to really thinking more strategically about, hey, I actually need to pivot my business and how I deliver my services or I deliver my product to be able to maintain my livelihood and support my family.
Mm-hmm. And so you're actually able to create an organization that provides specific help to businesses and to members as well, correct?
So all of our organizations offer that individually. And what's nice about this collective is that it allows us to leverage that strength and leverage what are the missing pieces of that. So we can either identify other partners or we can identify where policy needs to be adopted, where our county, state, and local governments can be supportive of our work and being those resources and trusted organizations on the ground with our variety of communities. But we're also examining, because this has only been 6 or 7 months and we've been on the grind, where are there opportunities of synergy where we can maybe work collectively to do something bigger as a group. So we're building the plane while we're flying it, and it's been fun.
Well, this is kind of the best of times and worst of times, as the old saying goes, because on the one hand, the problems that we are looking at as individuals, as community, and as businesses are monumental. They're horrific and frightening. At the same time, we know that condition is a condition that is always right for entrepreneurship. People who look at challenges as opportunities and not simply as problems. People who are not fixated on the atrocity and the oppression of the moment, but who see through it and see in it an opportunity to change and, as we said, to build back better. So how do you see our community faring through the COVID-19 pandemic and the George Floyd pandemic? How do you see that happening? What do you think?
I think there are a lot of things that I am concerned about because we were already left behind. And so when you have a system that is set up to leave you behind, how do you then catch up? So for me, it's about how do we respond in this moment? And I think that's some of the work that we're doing. But some of the other work that we're doing is now looking at this moment that now people are paying attention of what needs to change. So I was literally on a call with some of the governor's staff this morning of there are things that need to be looked at on a policy level that need to be permanently changed, right? So when we look at translation, we have part of our Black community are First Americans. And so how are we getting information to those folks that it needs to be that there needs to be translation? When these programs come in and we're working on the community, I am paying for translation services to make that available to the folks that we work with. How do we make that institutionalized in policy? Because I don't get paid for that, right? And so that's a drain on my capacity to be able to deliver the services that I'm providing to the community partners or businesses that we're working with. How can we start to really look systemically about how do we build a better system and holding the systems and processes that are in place accountable to do better and not just keep responding, but that we actually set up a system that's able to do that and not have to do all this emotional and physical labor to actually make this happen.
I'm Al McFarlane. This is Conversations with Al McFarlane. We're live on KFAI. We're also live to YouTube and Facebook. If you are watching the program, if you like this kind of conversation, like us on YouTube or subscribe, like us on Facebook, and we welcome your participation as well. I'm talking with Elaine Rasmussen. She's CEO of Social Impact Strategies Group and a member of the Minnesota Black Business Support Collective. And we're talking about how our communities navigate the challenging business, cultural, social environment of today, and how we move with both confidence and a commitment to success through to the other side of the COVID-19 pandemic. I believe, Elaine, that we're in a moment of transformation, and that this is COVID-19 is a problem that we simply have to both fix and exploit. We have to exploit it to develop our solution muscle. We have to believe that we have solutions that will serve our interest, that reflect our cultural strengths, our sense of identity, and reflect our desire and our right and our obligation to be at the table of decision, that our people have to be co-authors of futures, and the futures have to be ones in which our people win. And we have to also be able to clarify that winning, from our point of view, might not necessarily mean that somebody else must lose. The win-loss dynamic may be a false option or choice. There could be another way of looking at winning in which everybody can win. So I enjoy us having the conversation, and I think it's important that we have conversations that change the narrative about who we are and how we move forward, both expressing our humanity, our dignity, but also our appreciation that our presence is of great value to community and to our country and to the world. That's what I think. So having said that, let me ask you to talk about your personal story, how you've come to the work that you're doing. How you describe the work? You've described it in part organizationally, but I want to personalize that, because I think the personal story is a story that really gives insight into people's motivation and the drive they have to make change in community. Tell me about you. You have to unmute again. Unmute.
Yes, thank you. It's not a Zoom meeting unless somebody has to unmute. So it's unmute. So what I never really understood when people said that they had a calling in life, and it wasn't until 2012 that I had my moment where I understood what my calling was. I was sitting in a pre-conference session, and the session was talking about mission-related investing and program-related investing as it related to the philanthropy. I was working in philanthropy. There were about 55 people in the room. There were only 5 women, and only 2 women of color, myself and an Asian woman. And this was 2012, so not too long ago. Mm-hmm. And as everybody was introducing themselves, they were introducing themselves saying their name, their organization, and the assets under management that they were controlling. And I started to do a back of the envelope calculation of how much money was in that room with 55 people. And when it got to the billions, I had to stop counting. I couldn't get, and I had this sort of existential moment of like, how did I get in this room? How did I, as this brown girl who grew up poor in Los Angeles, California, be in this room with all of this wealth, all of this money? And seeing that there was no people of color. I didn't have assets under management. And so there was such a stark, and as they started talking about their impact, and they were so proud of the impact they were making. They were sharing these stories, and I'm sitting there mortified because actually some of their stories were reflecting some of the damage that was actually being done, or the expense or exploitation that was being done of Black and brown people to be able to be.
Let's hold up right there.
Yes.
Great. Let's unpack that. I think that's an important thing. So digress for a moment and
Sure.
Explain what you mean.
So what I mean is, in a pure, simple form, philanthropy, for my definition, are investment companies that happen to do grant making. They have 95% of their what's called a corpus that is invested. Then the interests that they make, or the return on investment that they make, is what they use to do their grant making. So if you've got an organization that has, let's just say, make math easy, $100,000 in their corpus, 5,000 is what is used for grant making, and the $95,000 is used to invest. And any interest that they make or return on investment that they make on the 95,000 is what informs and what is used for grant making. So the analogy I use with my business owners is like, if you had a cookie company and 95% of your business was, if you were a company and you had 95% of your business was making cookies and 5% was making brownies, but you called yourself a brownie company, like that's not true. You're a cookie company, right? So when I started,
listen, hold it.
Okay,
that's a good one. That's really good. I haven't heard it explained like that before. But that's a powerful picture. If you have a business and 95% of your business is actually making cookies, that's investing, right? But 5% is making brownies. You cannot call yourself a brownie company, but that's what philanthropy does right now. It says we're philanthropists, but really the business is business, making money. Okay, cool.
Okay, we got that.
I'm loving it. Go ahead.
So in that moment when I was in that room, and it was just like, I said, we have been fooled and tricked into arguing and fighting and competing with each other for the 5%. And no one is talking about the 95%. And actually how some of the 95% is being invested in prisons, is being invested in guns, is being invested in some of these what are called sin investments. And then on the other side,
drugs, Oxycontin, yeah.
Right, but on the other side, their philanthropy is working on defense funds. Their philanthropy is working on getting people to be able to start businesses once they become, they're no longer incarcerated. So it's this, I'm like, we're talking about the wrong thing. And that really was my lightning rod moment, or my getting knocked off the horse moment of like, I am dedicating my life to moving the money. That's what needs to happen. And because I had a finance background and I had a community development background, I felt like I was uniquely positioned to be able to translate across these different sectors, to help finance people understand that you are not agnostic. You are not allowed to say that
economics. I had a conversation with a gentleman. He said, well, you know, economics is agnostic. And I said, no, when we look at concepts such as the consumer price index, which tells us how much things are, and the consumer price index is based on labor. And we know that Black and brown people predominantly make up labor. These two things are inextricably linked, and we cannot say that finance is agnostic. It needs to have a voice, and it takes a position, whether it wants to say it directly that it takes a position or not, right? So I said, okay, a lot of times in philanthropy, people don't understand finance, and people in finance don't understand philanthropy. And I'm like, oh, I have these two sides of my brain that actually can come together. My background is in marketing communications. So I'm like, I can bridge, this is the role that I can play, but my life goal now is moving the money, and there is enough money. So I think that's the other thing of the scarcity model, that there isn't enough, which also philanthropy perpetuates, that there's not enough, or that there's a limited supply. And when I look at things like the company Theranos, which was based in California, that was able to raise $900 million of investment for a product that didn't exist. And if you don't know the story of Theranos, I encourage you to go on YouTube or HBO.
Listen, I've got time. Tell the story. I'm curious.
So the story of Theranos, it was a great concept, but the whole idea is to really be able to get multiple blood tests from a single drop of blood. And they had created the notion that they had developed a medical technology device that would be allowed to be able to do these multiple amount of tests without having to draw blood. And I don't know about you, I have very small veins. They always have to use a butterfly needle. I hate giving blood. Yep. It is never a good process for me. They have to stick me multiple times. So the whole idea of like, we could possibly eliminate the need for so much stress and trauma and having blood drawn by being able to take a very small vial of blood to do a numerous amount of tests. What they were actually doing was when people would come in and inspect, or investors would come, or regulators would come, they had this whole Ponzi scheme in the background of making it seem like they were running these tests when it wasn't. Mm-hmm. And they were able to raise $900 million. They had a huge building in Silicon Valley. Obviously, the CEO and the COO were getting paid millions of dollars in salary.
I remember the story. A young woman was CEO, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And for a product that didn't exist.
Yeah.
So when we look at that, and then we look at the cover of Vogue magazine in March of 2018, and only seeing 34 Black women being able to raise over $1 million or more in investments in their company, something is wrong, right? There is a problem, and it is a systemic problem, and it is a bias problem. And we have to name this and call this out. I just did a webcast a couple of weeks ago on discrimination in investing. And I talked through the life cycle of a Black person going back to slavery, and what that life cycle is, and how these wealth gaps have been created and perpetuated. And just by looking and using the notion of the concept of the present value of money. So if we just take the concept of the present value of money, which is an economic term, it's a mathematical calculation, and to see that $100 400 years ago, if you had $100, and we knew that 400 years ago we were enslaved, right? But if you as a white person had $100, that calculates, if we use the calculation of the present day value of money today, would equate to over $262 million.
Wow.
Now, what that means is not necessarily one particular person has $262 million, but the lineage of that family has $262 million versus the person who started with $1 and what that equates to over using that same calculation of present day value.
Versus the person who was the dollar.
Right, exactly, yeah, right. And that these systems that we actually, you look at Georgetown University, right? And how the descendants of the slaves who built Georgetown University, the only thing that they're benefiting from is that they get early admission. Versus what is the legacy of the people, the white people who have attended that college, and what their legacy children get, as opposed to the people who actually built that. So these are the things that we have to unpack and name and decide, because it's a decision that we are going to put in countermeasures to account for that disconnect.
I'm Al McFarlane. This is Conversations with Al McFarlane. My guest is Elaine Rasmussen. She's CEO of Social Impact Strategies Group and a member of the Minnesota Black Business Support Collective. And we're having a wonderful conversation, Elaine. I can tell you that I'm both intrigued and fascinated by what you're sharing, and I think that our viewers and listeners are as well. And what's most important simply is that we have this conversation. This ought to be dinner conversation in every household in our community, that our challenge has to be to change the tenor and tone of our engagement with each other around and towards understanding money,
Yes.
economics, power, and how we advance individually and collectively, how we, again, navigate and make sure that we are at the table of decision, that we are co-authors of futures in which we win. And, you know, as you were saying and describing the scarcity model, I'm thinking that equates to what I had described earlier as the false equivalency of how winning is described, right? And if the notion of winning means somebody must lose, that's operating with a scarcity. It's one or the other, right? But it doesn't have to be that way. And we have the power and we have the right to change how we see and what the outcomes will be based on what we perceive our interest to be. And we can believe that what we desire as decent human beings is a system and a set of processes that not only free us, but free others from their sense of scarcity as well. Let me go back to your training. You told me that you're from LA. Tell me about being from LA and what your training path was that brought you to the careers that brought you to the room where there were billions of dollars of investment at the table.
Yeah, so thank you. So fortunately or unfortunately, I still haven't figured that out yet. It has not been a beeline. So I started off my career, I did some stock analyst work at Shearson Lehman Brothers while I was in college, and went to school for business and marketing and communications. My dream was to be in international affairs and travel the world, and that didn't happen. Mm-hmm. But I had this really sort of long winding road career. I've been in public relations. I worked in the entertainment industry. I worked in the fashion industry. Like I mentioned earlier, I worked in philanthropy for a number of years. I even worked in academia. I worked at the State Department. I did crisis management. My master's degree is in conflict analysis and resolution, and I did my doctoral work in that same field. So I've had this really long winding career. And when I had that epiphanal moment that I shared earlier, my whole life made sense. I was like, I needed to do all those things to be able to do this. I needed to be able to understand all of these mechanisms. I needed to understand all these systems. And I also needed to understand how to talk to different people and be able to translate different things in different ways to be able for it to be heard. And so I was like, oh, so my career finally makes sense because I didn't have I was talking with a gentleman yesterday and he worked 23 years at Cargill, and I didn't have that path. I had a lot of personal crisis. I had a lot of existential crisis, very much similar to COVID. I was telling somebody the other day, my grandmother had a very strong gay community around her. So in the 80s, when the AIDS epidemic hit, I had to watch that up close and personal. When the riots happened after the Rodney King verdict, I lived right down the street from where those things happened. So I've been a part of these crises along my journey, and then having my own personal crises, I feel it's all benefited me in being able to show up the way that I show up, to be able to have compassion and empathy, but also be very grounded in what behavior is acceptable and what behavior is not acceptable. And as one of our values, we practice 360-degree compassionate accountability, saying, I understand that maybe you don't know what you don't know and that you are where you are, but also you now have to make a choice of whether or not you're going to do better. And here's the information. inception. So I call it the inception syndrome. You can now not unknow what you know. And so from this day forward, you are making a choice to either continue doing what you're doing and how you're doing it, or that you are going to strive and work towards doing things differently.
Talk about your family. You mentioned your grandmom. I think you said. But talk about your family. What I often ask my guests this, and I believe that family matters, and I believe that lineage matters, and I operate from the principle that I represent, all the ancestors that pour into my present, my now, and that the moment that I'm in is the gateway to the future, right? Through me, eternity passes. And so I have this respect for the elders, the ancestors. And I think most people do, or lots of people do. And I don't know if you phrase it the same way, but I'm raising the question. So you know where the question's coming from. Talk about your family and how being the you that you are is informed by the family that brought you to this place.
Yes, no, I love, I really believe that everything we do, we bring our whole spirit to, right? So I think that's the spirit in which your question comes from. So thank you. So my heritage, obviously, I did my DNA a few years back and saw that I am Native American, as many Black folks are, has some Native American lineage, but also my lineage goes back to Western Africa, but also, which was surprising, but how much percentage of Caucasian I had, which I think for sometimes, particularly being somebody more darker skinned, like I was like, oh, like that's a lot. So being surprised by that, but more formally, or formally, a lot of my family, my father's family comes from the South. I've just been reunited with my father's family. My father passed away when I was very young, so I've been reunited with some of the folks on my father's side of the family, and we have traces that go back to Hattiesburg, Mississippi, which, for those of you may not be familiar, Fannie Lou Hamer is from Hattiesburg. So I was just like, that was crazy that I went to the Civil Rights Museum that's in Jackson, Mississippi, and saw all of this. And I was like, oh my God, like she's from the same place. Like I have my what would be my great grandmother's census, going back to 1919, and her like not being able to sign her name, she just had an X. And to see that connection to Fannie Lou Hamer from the same community, Hattiesburg, Mississippi, which is a still small town, was just like a really crazy. And I just feel like the spirit of that, even though I didn't know that until recently, has always been within me. I think the other thing that has shaped me and for me, obviously, is my grandmother. My grandmother was 5'2" on a good day, a tiny Spitfire woman, but was very much about like, nobody's going to tell me how I'm going to live my life, what I'm going to do. I'm going to live my best life. She always was like dressed to impress. She was just this spirit of just like something that I could look up to, of just like, I have power, even within this construct. This was, back in the 70s and 80s. I still have power, and that I can exert that and use that, and not to just accept something because that is what you are told you should accept. But then even the counterpoint of that, of my mom's discipline and rigidity, I felt like a really good counterbalance. I do have a younger brother who's 5 years younger than me, and it's really weird. 5 years is enough space where like you're kind of like move into a different space. Like by the time you're 15 and they're 10, like you're not moving in the same space. Right. So, but all of that is definitely for me. And then now having my own family, I have 2 beautiful step kids, and I have my son. So we have a blended family, and they are my rock. They are the ones who allow me to do what I do, with the many late night phone calls that I take. I was on last night with several phone calls with different people. I've got a board call tonight, and so they supporting me and making sure that I'm fed and loved, to make sure that they see the vision of the work and my mission in my life to do this work, and they make space for me to be able to do that. Is just I feel so blessed, because I know other people who are trying to live their mission in life don't necessarily have that support.
That's powerful. I'm Al McFarlane. This is Conversations with Al McFarlane. My guest is Y. Elaine Rasmussen. She's CEO of Social Impact Strategies Group, and she's a member of the Minnesota Black Business Support Collective. We're talking about how we move forward individually and collectively towards our best selves as a community. Talking about equity, I think, when we're talking about this notion, I call it, Elaine, the feeling of sovereignty. And it's not to use the word loosely, and it's not to use the word as counter or in rejection of our space and our status and where we are, but it's to use that word in invoking a sense of equity and ownership in the enterprise of society, of governance, where we are right now. In that none of us feels, I believe, the need to walk away from the investment that has been made, that we have made in blood and treasure, and that we must simply become more intentional, more clear, and more forceful. And again, the word force is not to suggest what's the right word? Violence. Force means intensity and torque. How do we put muscle into our expectation that we can become, stewards of creation, become the stewards of creation that we truly are, and as such, again, demand and accept our seat at the table of decision in community and society and governance and beyond. And so, master's degree in what, and PhD in what? What were your fields of study?
Yes, so my master's is in conflict analysis and resolution. I'm still working on my doctorate. But I want to take this notion of sovereignty, because I want to be very mindful, because sovereignty is, when we typically talk about sovereignty, we're talking about tribal nations. And so what I typically like to translate sovereignty into, when we look at, Black folks in particular, seeing that we were taken from our land, and we were not allowed to, we're still to a certain extent not allowed to make space here for ourselves, but that we use another term, self-determination, because that's what we're talking about, right? That your zip code does not determine your outcomes. That you actually, one of the things that we talk about when we work with our entrepreneurs is that, yes, racism is real. Yes, sexism is real, but everything else is negotiable, right? And that doesn't mean you're always going to get what you want, but that you are empowered to say what you want and need, and that the other person has the autonomy also to accept or decline what you are offering or what you are asking for. And but that everything is negotiable. And I think that's what happens with, particularly with Black folks, is that our power gets beaten out of us, right? Either through nature or nurture, that we get beaten through our experiences into submission and not seeing the power that we have to show up in these conversations. And even for myself, my own personal journey, part of that came from me being in a lot of predominant white spaces and seeing how white people move, right? It's just how they move. And I was like, me just really internalizing that. I'm like, I'm just going to start moving like that, right? I'm just going to start, I'm really going to just start showing up in a way. And it was funny because this literally happened a couple of weeks ago. We, one of my colleagues and I, we were at the store and we had an appointment, and that the person who, we made this appointment and they were like, oh, well, you were called that the appointment was canceled. And I didn't care that the appointment was canceled. I made this appointment, like I needed to see it.
And I'm here now.
And I think normally, definitely 20 years ago, I would have just slinked away.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I ended up doing was like, I just stood there and I started like, and the woman seeing me stand there kept saying, well, we called you. And I just didn't even respond to her because it didn't matter whether or not she called me.
Mm-hmm.
I had an appointment. There was nobody sitting there and there was no reason why they couldn't help me.
Right.
Right? So I just stood there and she just kept saying that over and over again. Well, we called you and we left you a message, and we called you and we left a message. And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
and we ended up getting somebody to help me.
Mm-hmm.
And so to your point, it's like, I didn't have to raise my voice.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have to use force. I didn't have to call a manager. By me just standing there and unaccepting of what she was saying to me, because you're not doing anything right now, actually. You can actually help me, or somebody else can help me, because everybody here is not doing anything right now. And so it's those kinds of things of we have these subtle messages that tell us to go away, and we're so conditioned we don't even know that it's happening. And this happens to myself as well. Like, I don't even, and so I've really particularly these last, like, I'd say decade of my life, is watching for those things. And I will just tell you, to be perfectly frank, it's something that's been hyper prevalent living here in Minnesota, as opposed to other places that I've lived. I've really shown it's so subtle, and it is so entrenched, and it is so ingrained. I shared with a board that I sit on about, when I go to Target to make a return, the fact that I have to go through a mental check of like, am I okay? Because I know that there is a likelihood that I know that there's a likelihood that I'm going to have a confrontation. Or I'm going to be questioned, or I'm going to be, whatever the case may be is. And the fact that I have to decide how I'm going to dress to do that transaction. The fact that I have to do a mental check and physical check of like, am I prepared for whatever crazy comment or crazy thing that's going to be said to me, so that I don't end up in jail or shot, as we know is also a possibility. That all of that has to go into me making the simple transaction of making a return at Target. And those are things that I have not had to do in other places that I've lived, or at least not to that degree, or knowing that when I show up into a certain space or meeting, like what I have to brace myself for, that has a high likely possibility of happening in that meeting.
That's so so clear that what you're saying. And as you're saying that, I think about my wife, Bobby, and I, when we go shopping. She's got a way of phrasing this, and I'm just parroting what she says all the time. But she's written about this, and we write together for the newspaper. But she's written columns in which she describes the process of looking for a friendly face. You go to the store, so it's not a question of just going there to spend your money and to buy what you want or to buy what you need, but you also have to go through the extra step of finding someone that you guess might be friendly or cordial or respectful, and treat you with the dignity that you want. And you have to do the extra work to avoid people whose vibe or look or whatever it is suggests stress, and having to navigate a problem or a confrontation. So what you're saying is a common experience by our people. And it's like, what's the right word for it? 1,000 cuts or 1,000 microaggressions, right? And that's what Minnesota is good for. Is Minnesota nice means the 1,000 little slices and cuts and digs that you face every day. And if you call it out, people wonder what's wrong with you. And that you should be used to this and you should expect it. But I think you're absolutely correct, is that now is the time of transformation. And now's the time that our people can, with confidence, with clarity, what we've been able to learn and see, particularly through the George Floyd incident, is that now nobody has an excuse to say, oh, it didn't happen, or that it was a single solitary incident. We have known all the time from the beginning that this is systemic oppression, and it's murderous, and it's dangerous. And despite the danger that was physical and psychological and spiritual and every other imaginable way to describe it, we still have survived and have risen and have moved forward with a joy, a sense of possibility that is almost unexplainable, except that it reflects the best of resilience in human beings. So we own that, and I think we have to declare it and remind ourselves who we are, but also we have a window of opportunity in which we can also remind the world who we are, because the world needs what we have, I believe. And I'm not saying that with any sense of, false self-aggrandizement or self-delusion. I'm saying there's something in our experience that reflects a value, and the value that is there, we have to simply keep nurturing, keep protecting, and keep growing. What do you think?
100%. I think the hardship, consistent and persistent hardship of specifically Black and Indigenous people that we have been required to do for our own sustainability, our own longevity, and quite frankly, our existence, what we have had to endure and keep showing up to endure in order to, otherwise we would be wiped off the face of this earth, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's literally, I think white people sometimes think that we are being hyperbolic. And when we look at, we see the direct correlation to our health outcomes. So this is really our lives on the line, because it's not just one thing. It is not just the murder and assassination of our Black men. It is the murder and assassination of our Black men. It is the systematic incarceration of our Black men. It is the systemic miseducation in our education system to our young girls and boys.
Mm-hmm.
It is not being able to see positive images of yourself. So these things are layer upon layer upon layer. And then you look at Indigenous communities where they're not even seeing it all, right? And there's this presumption that everybody's getting $1 million from the government, which is also not true.
Mm-hmm.
And you constantly having to show up and explain yourself. You're constantly having to, I think this gets talked about a lot of just like Black and brown folks, but particularly I think Indigenous and Black folks. For us to be at the same place, we have to outperform by 3, right? So it can't be just enough that I got a master's degree. I had to be at the top of my class.
Mm-hmm.
Not just that I am the top candidate for a job, but if you look at my resume and accomplishments versus my counterparts, for me to get the same respect, for you to even put my application on par, that, I had to outperform. And I think I love comedy. So I always like, comedy is always a great thing. But Chris Rock talks about when, he became famous and started making money, and how, while he was a comedian who was making multi-million dollars as a comedian and a movie actor and all of those things, he was living on a block in his community were regular people like doctors and lawyers, and that he's the only Black person. And his like, that's when we start to look at kind of what does this look like on the ground of like, I had to be a multi-millionaire comedian to live in this neighborhood with like a doctor. This is what we're talking about, that we have to outperform to get to the same place.
Right.
And that we have to, and this is the thing that we even talk about with our businesses, going back to what we talked about with the Black Business Collective, of getting our businesses to not only perform excellence, to perform at a level of excellence, to be on par with their white counterpart businesses, but also just to make their business successful, right? Like what I tell our businesses, like, you should imagine, like, pick your icon. I don't care if it's Michelle Obama. I don't care if it's Nicki Minaj. I don't care if it's Rihanna. Whoever your icon is, treat every customer that they have come into your store, right? Because
we also have a problem of the expectations that we have on ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
and that our business is, I want to support you. I want to support a Black business, but I need you to pick up the phone and return the call when I call you.
Mm-hmm.
I need you to raise your game. And no, it's not fair. It's not fair.
Mm-hmm.
But also this is where we are. And if you don't call me back, you're leaving me no choice but to call a white business. Like, I need you to raise your game so that we can all do better, because I do want to give you thousands of dollars of business. But if you're not returning my call, or you're not communicating with me that my order is going to be late, or you're not, so we have to be holding each other accountable. And no, it's not fair that we're held to a higher standard, or sometimes a lower standard. But these are the things that if we really want to move into self-determination, we really need to unpack and be honest with ourselves about what is and what isn't going on, and that we also don't allow ourselves to fall into mediocrity.
Have you traveled around the world? Where have you traveled out of this country?
I have done, that's one of my favorite things to do. And so COVID is really putting a damper on that. No, I when I was 18, I lived in Turkey for a little bit. I have not gone to Africa. That is on my bucket list. But I've been to Asia. I've been to Europe. I've been to Spain, Portugal, France, Belgium, and I have not gone to Australia. And so I definitely want to go to Australia, and I definitely want to go to Hong Kong. I hear it's the place to go. So it's on my list.
So the notion of another country, I'm thinking of James Baldwin, the book, but the idea was that you have to be out of here to see what we have here with fresh eyes. Yes. What are your thoughts? And before you respond to that, and we're going to be out of time in about 3 minutes or so. Boy, it goes fast. The promise of the future, from my point of view, is that technology allows us to connect and do transactions between ourselves, not limited by the geography of my neighborhood, my corner store, but I can do business with the corner store in Johannesburg, the corner store in Kingston, and the corner store in Monrovia. But it's a question of elevating my mind and using the technology to make the connection. So speak about how we can use technology to create networks of profitability through valuing ourselves as markets and growing the market power that we represent. What do you think? And you got about 2 minutes.
2 minutes. Okay, this is going to be good. So one thing, when I went to Turkey when I was 18 and I came back and my friends asked me, like, how was it? I only saw 5 Black people for the 4 months that I was there. But what I told my friends was, for the first time I could exhale. I felt for the first time in my life I could breathe. And I felt for the first time I wasn't Black. I was a human. I was a person. And that was a powerful thing to go through as an 18-year-old. So leading up to how do we open up ourselves and open up to the world to be able to access? I'm a huge fan of technology. Anybody knows me, they're like, oh, there she goes again. She's on another platform. I love artificial intelligence. That's not to say that there aren't things to be concerned about all of those things, but I think we as a people need to be more open. I think Black folks in particular, we need to be more open to how can we leverage and use that to build equity, even though knowing that there are people who are using it to dismantle equity, right? So when we talk about, yes, what you say is you should have an online store so that anybody anywhere can find you. You should be able to digitally connect with your customers. You should be thinking, we need to be more systems thinkers. And I think that is culturally ingrained in us when you come from those places, but something has lost because we have been colonized to not think about that way. We look at the indigenous community, everything is related. We are all related. We are connected to the earth. We are connected to each other. And we need to be adopting that, and that there isn't a competition. What has been allowed to happen here is that we are not in connection with one another. And that's how we've been able to be taken apart and dismantled.
And so the mandate or the command of the moment is to, I call this, and I haven't got time to explain it, but to remember. And to use the word remember, not in the sense of, oh, I forgot something, but in the sense that we've been dismembered, and now we must remember, reconnect. And when we reconnect, we reform, recreate a body that is the true human body, I believe. Listen, we're out of time, but this has been a wonderful, wonderful conversation. I thank you so much for spending this hour with me, and we have to do it again. My guest, Elaine Rasmussen, CEO of Social Impact Strategies Group, a member of the Minnesota Black Business Support Collective. Rasmussen, Elaine, dear sister, give people contact information, because I think people want to follow up and find out how they can connect with your knowledge and your opportunity.
I would love that. So you can reach out to me. I'm on all the social channels. You can connect with us at ConnectUpMN, at SISG_. And my email is elaine@socialimpactnow.com.
Thank you so much. I'm Al McFarlane. This is Conversations with Al McFarlane. And we'll see you next time. Stay tuned for Lady J, great radio here on KFAI. We'll see you.
Thank you so much.